You look down at a toy poodle trembling slightly on a velvet couch cushion. It weighs roughly 6 pounds. It has a skull the size of an apple and a coat of tightly coiled, hypoallergenic curls. What goes through your mind when you see this creature? You probably think it is the furthest thing from nature imaginable. But beneath that manicured fur and the diamond-studded collar lies a terrifying truth. Inside the brain of that tiny animal beats the exact same biological rhythm as the apex predator that once ripped the throats out of wild elk across the frozen Siberian tundra. This is not a story about cute companions. This is the chronicle of the most ruthless, rapid, and bizarre biological hijacking in the history of planet Earth. How did a massive, flesh-tearing Ice Age killer morph into a shivering lapdog? To understand this, you must leave the living room behind. You must travel back roughly 30,000 years into the blinding blizzards of the Pleistocene epoch. The landscape was completely unforgiving. Glaciers the size of modern continents crushed the northern hemisphere. The winds howled with a biting chill that could freeze exposed flesh in minutes. The animals that roamed this frozen wasteland were gargantuan. Woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, and cave bears dominated the ice. To survive here, a predator had to be flawlessly engineered for violence. The gray wolf was nature's perfect biological weapon. It hunted in highly coordinated packs, using complex vocalizations and endless stamina to run prey to the point of sheer exhaustion. Its jaw muscles were anchored to a thick crest on the top of its skull, providing enough bite force to crush the frozen femur of a wild horse. It had a thick, double-layered coat of coarse fur designed to repel sub-zero moisture. Why on earth would the descendants of this ultimate apex survivor eventually fit inside a designer handbag? The truth begins with a brutal competition for calories. Survival in the Ice Age required burning thousands of calories a day just to stay warm. Hunting was incredibly dangerous. A kick from a desperate moose could shatter a rib and guarantee a slow, agonizing death in the snow. Meanwhile, nomadic human tribes were huddled around fleeting fires, clutching spears, trying to survive the endless freeze. These human camps left behind massive piles of rotting bones and discarded meat scraps. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet for any scavenger brave enough to claim it. Just beyond the glow of the flames, glowing yellow eyes watched from the tree line. Why would a human ever let a creature like that near their children? And why would a terrified wolf ever approach a blazing fire? The wolves did not want to approach. A normal wild wolf is saturated with a survival hormone called cortisol. This chemical floods their veins, acting as an intense flight or fight alarm system. It forces them to flee from the smell of smoke and two-legged primates. But evolution is a game of mutant anomalies. A tiny fraction of these wild wolves had a genetic glitch. Their adrenal glands were slightly smaller than normal. They produced less cortisol and less adrenaline. They were slightly less terrified. Does a lack of fear sound like a survival advantage? In the brutal depths of the wild, fear keeps you alive. But near a human camp, a lack of fear meant you got to eat the discarded bones while your highly aggressive, terrified brothers starved out in the snow. These slightly calmer wolves survived the brutal winter. They mated. They passed down their defective, lower stress genes to a new generation of pups. To unravel how this psychological shift destroyed the wolf's physical body, you have to look at a groundbreaking biological study initiated in the mid-20th century. A Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev began a secretive experiment in Siberia to recreate the domestication of the wolf in real time. He chose wild silver foxes, which are close genetic cousins to the gray wolf. Belyaev and his team walked past cages of highly aggressive, biting foxes. They only selected the tiny fraction of animals that did not bare their teeth or cower in absolute terror. They took these slightly calmer foxes and bred them together. Then they repeated the process with the babies. They strictly ignored the physical appearance of the animals. They were only filtering the gene pool for a single psychological trait. They only wanted tameness. The results of this experiment completely upended the scientific understanding of biology. Within merely 10 generations, the foxes began to undergo horrific physical mutations. Their wild silver coats became spotted with random white patches. Their stiff, upright predator ears suddenly flopped downward. Their straight tails began to curl over their backs. Their snouts shrank. Their teeth became remarkably smaller. Why would selecting for a calm personality completely disfigure an animal's skeleton and fur? The answer lies in a biological mystery known as the neural crest hypothesis. When a mammalian embryo is growing inside a mother, there is a specific cluster of tiny building blocks called neural crest cells. These cells are the ultimate multitaskers of the developing body. They migrate through the embryo to build the adrenal glands, which control fear and aggression. But those exact same traveling cells also build the rigid cartilage in the ears, the color pigment cells in the fur, and the actual bone structure of the snout. You cannot change one without accidentally breaking the others. By naturally selecting for Ice Age wolves with smaller adrenal glands, the harsh environment accidentally crippled their neural crest cells. The wolves that hung around human camps began to look like overgrown, mutant puppies. Their ears flopped because they lacked the necessary cartilage. Their coats developed patches of white because the pigment cells failed to migrate properly across their skin. Their skulls shrank. They permanently lost their terrifying wild camouflage. They had traded their apex predator bodies for a permanent state of biological adolescence for thousands of years. These tame, floppy-eared scavengers followed human tribes across continents, earning their keep as living alarm systems and tracking partners. They were the original, rough-coated village dogs. But as human civilizations grew out of the dirt, the rules of survival changed again. Agriculture replaced nomadic hunting. Wealth was invented. Royalty was born in sprawling European castles. In this new world, a massive, terrifying hunting dog was no longer a necessity for the elite classes. It was a liability. The wealthy nobility wanted companions that could sit in their laps, warm their hands during drafty winter nights, and flaunt their immense status. They demanded a living, breathing luxury item. This is where human manipulation shifted from an accidental byproduct of nature to a deeply intentional genetic hijacking. How exactly do you take the genetic code of a gray wolf and shrink it down to the size of a loaf of bread? You cannot simply starve a dog to make it permanently smaller. You have to locate the biological anomalies that naturally occur in mammalian reproduction. You look for the outcasts. In any population of mammals, there are genetic errors. A normal wolf skull is long, aerodynamic, and perfectly proportioned. But occasionally, a pup is born with a mutation in a specific piece of genetic code called the IGF-1 gene. This gene is the biological blueprint that tells the bones of the body when to stop growing. In a willed wolf pack, a pup with a broken IGF-1 gene is stunted, weak, and utterly useless. It would die in the first harsh winter. But to an eccentric human breeder living in a wealthy medieval city, that genetic defect was an absolute goldmine. Humans took the smallest, most defective dogs and bred them together. Then they took the smallest offspring from that litter and mated them again. They weaponized a concept of inbreeding. They forced the IGF-1 mutation to compound upon itself over and over. They were actively isolating and magnifying dwarfism. The bones of the legs shortened dramatically. The skull compacted inward, crowding the teeth together inside a jaw that was becoming far too small to safely hold them. But manipulating the size was not enough for the royal courts. They wanted a coat that did not shed heavy fur onto their expensive velvet clothing. So, the breeders looked for yet another natural mutation. They found dogs suffering from a broken RSPO2 gene. This rare defect prevents the dog from shedding its fur normally, forcing the hair follicles to grow continuously into tight, woolly ringlets. In the wild, a dog with a continuously growing coat would become matted with heavy mud, lose its thermal regulation, and freeze to death or die of massive skin infections. But in the lap of luxury, it was the perfect biological accessory. The toy poodle was officially engineered. What happens when you combine an incredibly high prey drive with a body that can barely climb a staircase? You get a creature whose brain is constantly writing checks its physical body cannot cash. This leads you to a profound paradox about the natural world that completely shatters how you view the concept of biological strength. You tend to think that humans conquered the wild by dominating the strongest beasts. But the truth is far more twisted. Humans did not conquer the magnificent gray wolf. Breeders isolated its weakest, most genetically defective offspring and built an entire artificial empire around their biological failures. The toy poodle is a masterpiece of broken genes. Do you see the grand irony in this evolutionary path? The toy poodle survives today, not because it is fit for the wild, but because it perfectly hijacked human psychology. The disproportionately large eyes, the fragile bones, the high-pitched whimpering sounds. These are all physical features that trigger the exact same caregiving instincts in the human mammalian brain as a crying, helpless human infant. The poodle did not need strong, bone-crushing jaws to survive the centuries. It used human hands to hunt for it, process its food, and build climate-controlled shelters to keep its defective coat warm. By becoming utterly helpless, the toy poodle achieved a level of evolutionary success that the wild gray wolf could only dream of. The fierce, terrifying gray wolf is currently struggling for survival, isolated to a few remote, freezing corners of the planet, hunted and despised by human farmers. Meanwhile, the shivering, mutated descendant of that very same wolf is currently sleeping on silk pillows in millions of homes across the entire globe. Which one is the true evolutionary victor? You look back down at the toy poodle trembling slightly on the velvet couch cushion. It yawns, revealing a row of tiny, overcrowded teeth that could barely puncture a thick piece of cardboard. It expects a gourmet treat just for existing in your presence. For tens of thousands of years of brutal evolution, this creature's direct ancestors survived by tearing raw flesh from bone in the frozen, blinding darkness. Now, its descendant survives by effortlessly manipulating your heartstrings. The next time you watch a small dog beg for a scrap of food, do not pity its fragile size. You are looking at an evolutionary genius that traded the brutal, unforgiving wild for ultimate, undisputed luxury. If you want to uncover more dark evolutionary secrets hiding right inside your living room, hit the subscribe button and join the channel to decode the hidden rules of nature.